The clang of steel doors echoed through Hollow Creek Correctional Facility, a place where time moved slow and hope was in short supply. James Jimmy Carver was inmate number 247193, an imposing figure with cold eyes and knuckles that told their own story in faded scars. He'd been inside for 8 years now, with 17 more to go for armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and possession of an illegal firearm. Career criminal. A man built from violence, not vulnerability. Jimmy didn't talk much. He had a short fuse and an even shorter list of people he trusted. His only routine was the wait yard and his cell. No visitors, no calls, just silence, until the letters started coming. It came on a rainy Tuesday, slipped beneath his cell door during mail call. Written on lavender stationery, it stood out immediately, a delicate contradiction to the grime of prison life. Dear James, you don't know me, but I saw your story in the prison pen pal column. Something about your eyes caught my attention. You look like someone who's been through fire and came out steel. I know I'm a stranger, but I'd like to be a friend, if you'll let me. Sabrina Rose. Jimmy read it 3 times before folding it neatly and hiding it in his Bible. Ironically, the one item he never opened until now. He didn't respond at first. Why would he? He figured it was some bored housewife or college kid writing for kicks. But the next week, another letter arrived. Then another. Sabrina wrote about her life, her love of poetry, her favorite old movies, her childhood in Texas. She asked questions, real ones. Not about his crimes, not about his past, but about his heart. And somehow that got to him. By now, Jimmy was writing every night. The guards noticed the change. He didn't fight as often. He skipped yard time less. He even started grooming again. In his letters, he told Sabrina things he hadn't told anyone. About how he watched his mother get beaten by his stepfather. About how he'd held his little brother's hand the day he overdosed. About the first time he held a gun, and the first time he pointed it at someone. Sabrina never judged him. She wrote back with compassion, even when he poured out his darkest memories. You are not your worst moment, she once wrote. You are the man who survived it. The words didn't just stay on the paper. They carved their way into him. Jimmy began to believe, just maybe, he was more than a number on a prison uniform. When Sabrina applied to be on his visitation list, Jimmy felt nervous. An emotion foreign to him. He'd built his life on fearlessness, but this felt like standing on the edge of something real. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon in early spring. The visiting room was crowded with families, echoing laughter, crying babies, and the buzz of vending machines. But when she walked in, Jimmy felt the whole room disappear. She was tall, elegant, and dressed in a modest floral dress. Her skin was smooth, her lips painted soft pink, and she wore a sun hat tilted just enough to cast a romantic mystery over her features. But her eyes held him captive. They sat across from each other, separated only by a scratched table and years of pain. She reached for his hand. He hesitated, then gave in. You're even more handsome than your letters, she said, smiling. Jimmy cracked a grin for the first time in months. And you're realer than I imagined. Over the next few months, she came every week. Rain or shine, she never missed a Sunday. Their visits were full of laughter, stolen touches, long conversations about life after prison, about a future. Jimmy told his cellmate, I'm gonna marry that woman. The other inmates teased him. Some called him soft, but Jimmy didn't care. He had someone now. Someone who made him feel human. Someone who made the walls less cold, the nights less empty. In her presence, Jimmy wasn't inmate number 247193. He was just Jimmy, a man dreaming of redemption, of love, of life beyond the bars. The proposal was raw and simple. During one of their visits, Jimmy passed her a folded napkin with the words, "Will you marry me? Check yes or no." She laughed, eyes wet with emotion, and drew a shaky checkmark on the yes. That moment would replay in his mind for days afterward. Her smile, her trembling hands, the kiss they stole when the guard wasn't looking. For the first time in his adult life, Jimmy felt hope. But beneath that hope, just out of sight, a secret waited. One that would twist his love into something monstrous. One that would stain the concrete floor of the visiting room in red. Love in prison doesn't come wrapped in white lace and rose petals. There's no aisle to walk down, no first dance, no champagne toasts. But for Jimmy Carver, none of that mattered. All he wanted was to put a ring on the woman who had, against all odds, made him feel alive again. Marrying someone from the outside while incarcerated required layers of bureaucracy. Jimmy had to file a formal request with the prison's administration. Sabrina had to undergo background checks, complete a spousal visitation, training, and submit an affidavit stating the marriage was voluntary and not being conducted under duress. It took 3 months, but finally, after multiple denials, revisions, and appeals, the approval came through. Inmate James Carver is granted permission to marry civilian visitor Sabrina Rose Monroe on facility grounds. The date was set, July 10th. The ceremony would take place inside the Hollow Creek visiting room, the same space where their connection had deepened week after week. On the morning of the ceremony, Jimmy woke up before sunrise. He shaved with a single-use razor, carefully trimming his facial hair, even though the mirror in his cell was cracked and cloudy. He brushed his teeth 3 times. Then he ironed his beige prison uniform as best as he could with a book wrapped in cloth. In his pocket, he carried a ring, a simple silver band bought through the prison's commissary catalog. It wasn't much, but it was all he could give. And it meant everything. His cellmate, a grizzled lifer named Hector, gave him a rare nod of approval. "You sure about this, man?" Hector asked. Jimmy smirked. "As sure as I've ever been about anything." The bride, Sabrina, arrived that afternoon, escorted through 3 layers of security. She wore a long, pale blue dress, just modest enough to pass inspection but elegant enough to feel like a bride. A soft veil covered her face. Her heels clicked softly on the floor as she walked, her hands clutching a small bouquet of fabric roses. Some guards stared, others whispered, but Sabrina didn't flinch. She was here to marry her man. Only 5 people were allowed to witness the event. 2 guards, a prison chaplain, the notary officiating the wedding, and Jimmy's caseworker. There were no guests, no music, just the heavy silence of prison concrete and the low hum of fluorescent lights. The chaplain, reading from a worn Bible, asked them to face each other. Sabrina reached for Jimmy's hands. He gripped hers tightly. "James Carver," the chaplain began, "do you take Sabrina Rose Monroe to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jimmy said, his voice deep and steady. "Sabrina Rose Monroe, do you take James Carver to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she whispered. The vows were short, but the moment was immense. As they sealed their union with a kiss, a brief, hesitant peck under the wary eye of the guard, Jimmy felt something shift, something powerful. For once, he wasn't defined by his past. Not by the crime that got him locked up. Not by the men who feared him. He was a husband. That night, back in his cell, Jimmy lay on his bunk with a dazed smile. He stared at the ceiling and replayed the moment over and over. The way she said, "I do." The way her fingers shook slightly when they exchanged rings. The warmth in her eyes as she looked at him, not as a prisoner, but as a man. "One day," he whispered to himself, "we'll have a real house, real freedom, maybe even kids." He didn't notice that his cellmate, Hector was watching him quietly from the top bunk. "You ever wonder why she picked you?" Hector asked, a strange edge in his tone. Jimmy looked up. "What do you mean?" Hector shrugged. "You're a lifer. No money. No freedom. Ain't that odd? A woman like that, waiting for a man like you." Jimmy chuckled. "That's love, old man. You wouldn't understand." But Hector's words lingered longer than Jimmy wanted to admit. What Jimmy didn't know, couldn't know, was that the veil Sabrina wore that day wasn't just a bridal accessory. It was a symbol of everything she was hiding. A secret identity, a buried past, and a truth that, if revealed, would turn their love story into a waking nightmare. For now, though, Jimmy remained blissfully blind. He was a husband. She was his wife. And nothing else mattered. At least not yet. Weeks after the wedding, prison life resumed. But something had shifted. Jimmy walked with more pride, more purpose. The inmates noticed. So did the guards. Some congratulated him. Others weren't so kind. "You really married that Amazon-looking chick?" one inmate jeered during yard time. "Man's gone soft," another muttered. "Or blind," someone else added under their breath. Jimmy ignored it at first, but the whispers kept growing. Started small. Comment here. A smirk there. Then one afternoon, his cellmate Hector leaned in. "You ever look at her hands, Jimmy? Real close." "What?" Jimmy snapped. "She tall. Shoulders like a linebacker. Voice kinda off. You ever notice that?" Jimmy shoved Hector back against the wall. "Watch your mouth." But even as he walked away, something gnawed at his gut. That Sunday, Sabrina came to visit like always. She wore a black turtleneck and long sleeves. Her perfume was light and floral. She smiled as she sat across from Jimmy, reaching for his hand. But this time, Jimmy hesitated. "You okay, baby?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah, just tired," he replied, forcing a smile. He scanned her face, the curve of her jaw, the size of her hands. Were the others right? Was he missing something? But then she laughed. A soft, musical sound, and all his doubts melted again. She was his wife, his light in the dark. Later that week, a corrections officer named Danvers pulled Jimmy aside after chow. "Hey Carver, off the record. You ever do a background check on your girl?" Jimmy frowned. "What the hell are you talking about?" Danvers lowered his voice. "Name's Sabrina Monroe, right? You might want to check the records again. That name didn't always belong to a woman." Jimmy's fists clenched. "You're full of it." Danvers smiled darkly. "Believe what you want, but you deserve to know the truth." That night, Jimmy didn't sleep. His mind spun. He stared at the letters she'd written, her flowing handwriting, her careful words. He remembered every visit, every laugh, every look. Was it all a lie? He began pacing his cell, rereading everything. He even asked Hector to help him request her birth records. He needed proof, anything to shut down the noise in his head. 3 days later, it arrived. A plain manila envelope, addressed to James Carver. No return name, just a county seal. Inside was a single page. A birth certificate. Name at birth, Samuel Ross Monroe. Gender, male. Date of legal name change to Sabrina Rose Monroe, 2014. Jimmy stared at it. Time slowed. His hands trembled. The paper slipped to the floor. His breathing quickened. His vision blurred. "She's a man?" he whispered. "She lied to me?" In that moment, something inside Jimmy broke. The man who had dared to believe in love, the man who found hope inside concrete walls, was gone. All that remained was rage. It was a Saturday. The sky above Hollow Creek Prison was clear and blue. a cruel contrast to the storm building inside Jimmy Carver. For days, Jimmy had been a ghost, silent, withdrawn, haunted. The whispers had stopped, but the damage was done. That single sheet of paper, Sabrina's birth certificate, burned in his mind like a brand. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just waited. And today he would confront her. 10:15 a.m. Sabrina arrived at the prison gates as she always did. Early, dressed modestly, her makeup perfect. She was carrying a small clear bag with snacks and quarters for the vending machine. She smiled at the guard. "Here to see my husband." The guard buzzed her through without question. She passed through metal detectors, pat-downs, and a search of her belongings. Standard procedure. She was led to visitation room 3, where Jimmy was already seated. He looked different, stone-faced, still, as like ice. Sabrina sat down across from him and reached for his hand. "Hey, baby, missed you." He didn't respond. She tilted her head. "You okay?" Jimmy slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Sabrina looked down. Her birth certificate. She froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "So it's true," Jimmy said, voice flat. "You were born a man." "Jimmy, don't lie to me. I was going to tell you. I thought you'd leave. I thought I'd lose you." Jimmy leaned in. His jaw clenched so tight it trembled. "You let me marry you. You stood there and said vows. And the whole damn time, you were lying." "I didn't lie about loving you. You made me a joke in here," he snarled. "They all knew before I did." The room was deadly quiet. Other inmates and visitors glanced over, sensing the tension. "Jimmy, please. I love you. I never meant to hurt you." But her words barely registered. His mind was spinning. Not with logic, not with love, but with betrayal, humiliation, and the crushing weight of his prison reputation. What happened next was so fast, yet so calculated. Jimmy stood up. The guards didn't move. They'd seen emotions run high in the visiting room before. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a sharpened toothbrush, a shank he'd hidden between his uniform and his skin. Gasps rang out. Sabrina tried to back away, her chair scraping the floor. "Jimmy, don't." But it was too late. He lunged. The first stab landed just below her collarbone, the second in her abdomen, the third across her face. Screams filled the room. Visitors ran. Guards rushed forward. 2 tackled Jimmy to the ground. The shank skittered across the floor, covered in blood. Sabrina collapsed, her veil soaked crimson. "She lied to me," Jimmy roared as they dragged him away. "She lied." Emergency medical staff arrived within minutes. Sabrina was barely breathing, her pulse fading. As paramedics wheeled her out, her eyes fluttered open. "Tell him, I'm sorry," she whispered. Then everything went black. Hours later, Jimmy sat in a solitary cell, blood still staining his knuckles. He stared at the wall, silent. For a moment, there was no anger, no regret, just emptiness. He had killed the only person who ever said, "I love you," and meant it. But all he could whisper now was, "She lied." The news broke within hours. Inmate murders spouse in prison visiting room. Shocking twist. Victim was transgender woman. Was it love, betrayal, or hate? By Monday morning, Hollow Creek Correctional Facility was flooded with reporters, activists, and protesters. Some held signs demanding justice for Sabrina Monroe. Others called Jimmy a victim of deception. But the courtroom would become the true battlefield. The district attorney wasted no time. James Carver was charged with first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon inside a correctional facility, premeditated assault, The prosecution argued that the killing was not a crime of passion. It was an execution. He lured her there under false peace, the DA told the press. Then he butchered her for who she was. Jimmy's public defender, Martha Lindsay, was handed a grenade. She knew the facts. She knew the media frenzy. But she also knew the man behind bars. A broken inmate, humiliated, desperate to cling to something real in a life that offered him nothing. Her defense was simple. Emotional betrayal, psychological trauma, and provocation. My client was deceived. He married a person who hid the very foundation of their identity. In the hypermasculine, volatile world of prison, this wasn't just emotional betrayal, it was social suicide. And he snapped. It wasn't a legal justification, but it might win him some sympathy. The courtroom was standing room only. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but sketch artists worked overtime. Jimmy sat still at the defense table, shackled, eyes sunken, jaw clenched. Across the aisle sat Sabrina's mother, Janet Monroe, stone-faced and silent, clutching her daughter's photo. The prosecution opened with a gut punch. This is not just a murder. It is a hate crime, executed in cold blood. Mr. Carver brought a weapon into a visiting room and stabbed his wife multiple times. Because she was transgender. That is not rage. That is intent. They brought forward guards, fellow inmates, and even Sabrina's therapist, who confirmed she had expressed fear that Jimmy might one day turn if he found out the truth. It was rare, but Jimmy insisted. He wanted to speak. She told me she loved me, he said, voice gravelly. And I believed her. Every word. Every letter she wrote. I thought I'd found someone who saw me. Me, not the inmate, not the number. Just Jimmy. But she lied. For years. About something so big, so personal. I couldn't breathe when I found out. Felt like my chest had cracked open. And in that room, when she looked at me like I was still her husband, I just lost it. I couldn't think. I couldn't stop. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge blinked hard. But the prosecution hit back hard. So instead of walking away, you stabbed her. Multiple times. You didn't lose it, you planned it. You brought the weapon. You didn't stop at one blow. This wasn't heartbreak. This was punishment. Jimmy didn't flinch. I don't know what it was anymore. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 2 days. They returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Jimmy showed no emotion, just nodded once. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 25 years for the weapon. The country exploded with opinions. LGBTQ plus advocates called Sabrina a martyr, a woman who loved too boldly and died for her truth. Conservative commentators defended Jimmy's mental break and decried forced deception. The internet was a battlefield. But one truth remained. A woman died. A man lost his soul. And a love story turned nightmare had been carved into courtroom history.